close your eyes with me. Tonight I want you to imagine something strange. A carriage is carrying you slowly down a long avenue of old trees toward a house so large that you cannot see all of it at once. You have been invited to spend a whole weekend as the guest of one of the great families of the land in one of the great country houses of Victorian England. For 2 or 3 golden days you will sleep beneath their roof, eat at their table, walk in their gardens, and be waited upon by an army of servants you will mostly never see. It is the most coveted thing in the social world. People scheme for years to be asked, and you have been asked. And here is the strange part, the part that no one quite explains to you as they fuss over your trunks and envy your good fortune. You are about to spend 2 days being more comfortable, more idle, and more carefully watched than you have ever been in your life. Every meal will be a small ceremony. Every hour will have its appointed pleasure. And beneath the ease and the laughter and the endless food, an invisible machine of rules will be running, quietly, deciding where you sit, when you speak, which door you may use, and exactly how much you matter. For the Victorian country house weekend was a kind of beautiful theater, a performance of leisure so elaborate that it was in its own way a great deal of work. And you have just been handed a part to play. The year is somewhere in the warm late afternoon of the 19th century. Queen Victoria sits upon her throne. The railways have made it possible for the great houses to fill up with guests in a single afternoon, and the country house party has become the very heart of fashionable life. And into one of these houses, into its hush and its splendor and its quiet, watchful rules, you are about to step. And here is the gentle paradox we will follow tonight. You are going somewhere to rest, and you will scarcely have a moment to yourself. You are going to be a guest, free of all care, and you will follow more unspoken rules in 2 days than you follow at home in a month. You are going to be idle, gloriously idle, and idleness, you will discover, can be its own kind of labor. Everyone you know believes you are the luckiest creature alive, and they are not entirely wrong, but they are not entirely right either. If this is your first time here, welcome. I make these long, slow, rambling history stories for people who simply want something calm to fall asleep to. If that sounds like your kind of thing, you might like to subscribe and stay a while. No pressure at all. And if you feel like it, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. Is it late where you are, or early, or somewhere quiet in between? I always like to know. All right, let yourself settle a little deeper into wherever you're resting. Let your shoulders soften, slow your breathing, and let us step down together gently from the carriage onto the gravel of the great drive and into the long golden weekend that waits inside the house. It begins, as these things always do, with a small stiff card. It arrives one ordinary morning on the breakfast table, among the letters and the bills, and from the moment you see the thick cream paper and the engraved family name across the top, you know that the shape of your month has just changed. You are invited to a house party, to come down on the Friday and stay until the Monday, to a house you have heard of all your life and never seen. The wording is careful, gracious, and entirely conventional. But beneath the polite phrases lies a small social triumph, and everyone at the table understands it at once. Here's a mainstream fact that explains why such a card mattered so much. In the Victorian upper classes, the country house weekend was not merely a pleasant outing, it was the central machinery of society itself. It was where marriages were arranged and careers advanced, where political business was quietly done over the port, where reputations were made and unmade. To be invited to the right houses was to be inside the charmed circle. To be left off the lists was a quiet catastrophe that could shape your whole future. An invitation like this was not just an invitation to enjoy yourself. It was a statement made in engraved letters about exactly where you stood in the world. And so a quiet flurry begins. There are replies to be written in the correct hand on the correct paper. There are questions of what to bring and what to wear and whom you will meet and how you must behave. For a weekend at a great house was not a simple thing to pack for. You would need different clothes for the morning and the afternoon and the evening, clothes for walking and clothes for dining, clothes for church on the Sunday, and clothes for the journey home, a whole wardrobe carried in trunks for 2 or 3 days away. Here's a quirky tidbit that captures the sheer scale of it. A fashionable lady might change her clothes 4, 5, even 6 times in a single day at a country house. A morning dress, a walking costume, a tea gown, a dinner gown, and each change required help and time and a mountain of luggage. Guests arrived with enormous trunks, and the hall of a great house on a Friday afternoon could resemble a railway platform, heaped with the leather baggage of the fashionable, each piece labeled and waiting to be carried up the back stairs by footmen who would never be thanked for it. You spend the days before in a pleasant fever of preparation, the trying on, the deciding, the small anxieties about whether your gowns are grand enough for such company. And beneath it all runs a thread of excitement, pure and simple, the excitement of going somewhere new and golden, of stepping for a little while into a life larger than your own. Some historians argue that these house parties were the real engine of Victorian power, the place where the governing class knit itself together, made its decisions, and renewed its bonds far from any voter or newspaper. Others see them as glittering idleness, a vast expense of money and effort in pursuit of nothing more than pleasure and precedence. And the truth, as it so often does, probably rests somewhere quietly between. Serious business and beautiful frivolity folded together into the same engraved card. The reply is sent, the trunks are packed, and on the Friday you set out. The journey itself has a particular flavor, a sense of leaving the ordinary world behind by degrees. You travel down by train, most likely, for it was the railway that made the whole golden machine of the house party possible, carrying the fashionable out of the city and into the deep green countryside in a matter of hours. You sit in your compartment as the streets give way to suburbs, and the suburbs to fields, and the fields to the soft rolling country where the great houses hide among their trees. The light changes. The air, when you lower the window, smells of grass and coal smoke and faintly of summer. Here's a mainstream fact that shows how new all this was. For most of history, visiting a distant great house had been a slow and serious undertaking, days of jolting travel by coach over bad roads. But the railways, spreading across Britain through the middle of the century, changed everything. Suddenly, a host could gather a house full of guests from across the country for a single weekend and send them home again on the Monday. And the modern house party, quick, frequent, fashionable, was born from the iron and steam of the railway age. The very rhythm of upper-class life had been reset by the timetable. At the little country station nearest the house, you step down onto the platform, and there it is waiting, a carriage sent from the great house, with a coachman and perhaps a footman, the family crest small upon the door. Your trunks are loaded, you are handed up, and the carriage rolls out of the station and into the lanes, and the last of the ordinary world falls away behind you. Here's a quirky tidbit about that final stretch of the journey. The approach to a great house was often deliberately theatrically long, a winding drive, sometimes a mile or more, curling through a carefully designed park, so that the house revealed itself slowly, grandly, exactly as its builders intended. You did not simply arrive at the door. You were taken on a small journey through the family's own private landscape, past their lake and their great trees and their grazing deer, all of it arranged generations before to impress upon you the wealth and permanence of the people you were about to meet. You sit back against the cushions as the carriage sways through the lanes, watching the hedgerows pass, feeling the day soften toward evening. There is a particular peace in being carried this way, with nothing to do but arrive, your cares left behind on the station platform, the long weekend opening before you like a door. Some historians argue that the railway democratized the country house, opening its weekends to a wider, faster, more mixed society than the old slow world had ever allowed. Others note that it only made the charm circle spin more quickly, the same families visiting the same families, now simply more often. And the truth lies somewhere between, an old world made faster, not opened by the new machine that carried you. The lane bends one final time, and the gates of the park come into view. And then, through the trees, you see it, and for a moment you forget to breathe. The great house rises at the end of the drive, larger than any private dwelling has a right to be, a long front of pale stone with rows upon rows of tall windows catching the last gold of the afternoon. There are wings and chimneys and a great pediment over the door. There are terraces and balustrades. There is somewhere the gleam of a glass house and the dark green of clipped yew. It does not look like a place where people simply live. It looks like a small kingdom that happens to have a family at its head. Here's a mainstream fact that helps explain the sheer size of it. A great Victorian country house was not just a home. It was the headquarters of a vast estate, the visible center of a family's land, wealth, and power, and it was built to say so. Its size announced the acres that surrounded it and the rents that flowed in from tenant farms. Its grandeur was a kind of public statement, carved in stone, about the family's place at the top of the world. To build and keep such a house was ruinously expensive, and that was precisely the point. The house was the family's fortune made visible, standing in the landscape for all to see. The carriage sweeps around the final curve and draws up before the great door, and the gravel crunches beneath the wheels and falls silent, and before you have quite gathered yourself, the door of the house opens, and figures appear, and the whole smooth machinery of arrival begins to turn around you. Here's a quirky tidbit about that first impression. These long, winding, perfectly composed approaches were no accident of nature. They were among the great artistic achievements of the age, the work of landscape designers who spent fortunes and decades shaping the very ground, moving hills, digging lakes, planting trees that would not mature for 100 years. all to create the single perfect view of the house from the drive. The natural beauty that took your breath away had, very often, been designed down to the last tree by people long dead for exactly the effect it was having on you now. You step down from the carriage onto the gravel, and you stand for a moment in the great cool shadow of the house, looking up at all those windows, feeling very small and very lucky, and just a little afraid. The journey is over. The weekend has begun, and the house, vast and serene and watchful, seems to look back down at you. Some historians argue that these houses were genuine centers of community and culture, employing whole villages and patronizing the arts. Others see them as monuments to inequality, a handful of families consuming the labor and rents of thousands to live like minor royalty, and the truth lies somewhere between, a marvel and an injustice built of the same pale stone. But there is no time to ponder it now. Your hostess is coming down the steps to greet you. Your hostess comes toward you with both hands outstretched, and her welcome is warm and gracious and utterly practiced. She is the mistress of all this, the lady of the house, and the success of the whole weekend rests upon her shoulders, though she will never let you see the weight of it. She greets you by name, says how glad she is you could come, makes some light remark about your journey, and in the same breath begins gently to organize you. Who else has arrived, when tea will be, where you will be lodged. Behind her welcome lies a general's command of the field, for a great house party was a campaign, and she was its commander. Here's a mainstream fact about the woman at the center of it all. The lady of the house carried an immense and largely invisible burden. It was she who drew up the guest lists, balancing rank and temperament and old quarrels and budding romances. She who planned the menus and the entertainments and the seating at every dinner. She who managed, through her housekeeper, the small army of servants that made the magic happen. A great hostess was a kind of artist whose medium was other people, and the seemingly effortless pleasure of her guests was the product of enormous, hidden, ceaseless work. You pass with her through the great door and into the hall, and here the house takes your breath a second time. It is a vast space, rising perhaps the full height of the house, with a great staircase sweeping up into shadow, with portraits of long-dead ancestors gazing down, with armor, or antlers, or banners upon the walls, with a fire burning even in summer and a fireplace you could stand inside. The air is cool and smells of wood smoke and beeswax and old stone. Your footsteps echo. You have entered the heart of the house. Here's a quirky tidbit about that first great room. The hall of a country house was deliberately designed to overwhelm, and the portraits that lined it were a key part of the performance. Those ranks of painted ancestors, in their ruffs and armor and silk, were there to remind every visitor that this family had been great for centuries, that its roots ran deep into the soil of England, that you stood among people whose names were older than the nation's institutions. Sometimes, it must be said, a few of those grand ancestors had been quietly purchased at auction by a family wishing to look older than it was. Not every painted lord on the wall was truly a grandfather, but you were not meant to ask. You stand in the great hall, turning slowly to take it all in, while servants move silently with your trunks, and your hostess speaks of dinner and dressing. And you feel the particular sensation that these houses were built to produce, the sense of being a very small and very recent thing in a place that has stood and will stand far longer than you. Some historians argue that this theater of ancestry was the glue of the aristocratic order, a way of teaching everyone, including the family itself, to believe in its right to rule. Others see it as a grand and sometimes fraudulent illusion, propping up power with painted faces. And the truth lies somewhere between, real history and useful myth, hanging side by side in their heavy gilded frames. But your hostess is speaking again. It is time, she says, to show you to your room. You are led up the great staircase and along a corridor, and at last to a door, and through it to the room that will be yours for these few golden days. And it is lovely. A high bed with hangings, a fire already laid, a writing table, a view from the tall window out over the park toward the lake. Fresh flowers stand in a vase, the water in the jug is warm. Everything has been prepared for you by hands you did not see before you ever arrived. You stand in the middle of it and feel a deep, contented ease settle over you. For a little while, this beautiful room is yours, and the world is very kind. Here's a mainstream fact about where exactly you have been put. In a great house, the assignment of bedrooms was a delicate and meaningful art. The best rooms, the grandest, the warmest, the nearest to the family went to the most important guests, and a sharp-eyed visitor could read the entire pecking order of the party from the geography of the bedrooms. To be given a fine room near the heart of the house was a quiet honor. To be lodged in some distant, chilly chamber up an awkward stair was a quiet message about your standing. Your hostess had placed you with great care, and where she had placed you said precisely what she thought you were worth. And there is more to the map of the house than mere comfort. For a country house was a place of intricate, unspoken geography. Rooms you might enter freely, rooms you must be invited into, the great gulf between the family's wing and the guests, and the deeper gulf still between all of that and the hidden world of the servants. To know how to move through the house, where to go and where never to wander, was a skill you were expected simply to possess. Here's a quirky tidbit about those bedroom assignments that scandalized and delighted in equal measure. Among certain fashionable sets, the placing of the bedrooms was understood to have a second, unspoken purpose: to allow discreet romantic arrangements to flourish over the course of the weekend. A worldly hostess might, with perfect outward innocence, lodge particular guests conveniently near one another, and the famous nocturnal traffic of certain country house corridors was an open secret among the sophisticated. There was even a gentle custom, in some houses, of a bell rung early in the morning, so that wandering guests might return to their own rooms before the servants brought the tea. The house kept many secrets, and it kept them very well. You move about your lovely room, touching the soft counterpane, looking out at the lake turning gold in the evening light, and you begin slowly to unpack, or rather, you do not, for a maid will come to do that for you. There is, you are realizing, almost nothing here you are permitted to do for yourself. The room is yours, and like everything else in this house, it comes with rules you must learn to read. Some historians argue that this elaborate geography of status was a harmless game, a kind of social grammar everyone understood and enjoyed. Others see in it a constant, grinding assertion of hierarchy, reminding every soul in the house of exactly where they ranked every hour of the day. And the truth lies somewhere between, a game and a cage, played out in the assignment of rooms. There is a soft knock at the door. Your maid has come to dress you for dinner. The first dinner of a house party is a thing to be approached with care, and so the dressing of you begins well before the hour. A maid has been assigned to you for the weekend, perhaps your own, brought with you, or perhaps one of the houses, lent for your comfort. And now she sets about the long, intricate business of turning you from a traveler into a vision fit for a great dining room. The bath is brought, the water warm and scented. Your hair is taken down and brushed and dressed with pins and combs into an elaborate arrangement that will catch the candlelight. And then comes the gown and the corset beneath it, and the slow, careful work of fastening you into the evening's armor. Here's a mainstream fact about the gulf between a lady and her clothes. A fashionable evening gown was a structure of such complexity, with its boning, its layers, its dozens of tiny buttons and hooks fastening up the back, that it was very nearly impossible to put on or take off without help. This was no accident. The sheer unwieldiness of fine clothing was itself a mark of status. It announced, silently but unmistakably, that the wearer was a woman who had servants, who never dressed herself, who lived a life in which her own hands need never struggle with a fastening. To be dressed by another was not merely a convenience, it was the very emblem of being a lady. And so you stand in the warm lamplit room while the maid works behind you, and you feel the corset draw tight and the weight of the gown settle over you and the cool press of jewels at your throat. You are being assembled piece by piece into the person the dinner requires you to be. Here's a quirky tidbit about the corset that ruled it all. The tightly laced corset, that famous instrument of the Victorian silhouette, was the subject of fierce debate even in its own day. Doctors warned against it, reformers railed against it, and yet it remained for the fashionable woman all but unavoidable, for the gowns were cut to a shape that only the corset could produce. There were quiet tricks of the trade, looser lacing for a long evening of dining, a moment of blessed relief when the stays could be eased, and many a lady learned to breathe in the shallow, careful way the corset demanded, and to ignore with practiced grace the small, constant discomfort that was simply the price of looking correct. At last you are finished, jeweled, gloved, your hair gleaming, your reflection in the long glass a stranger of startling elegance. The maid steps back. You take one careful breath against the corset's grip, and from somewhere far below in the great house, a sound rises through the floors, the deep, sonorous note of a gong, calling the guests to gather. Some historians argue that this elaborate dressing was a genuine art form, a daily act of creativity and self-expression in lives that allowed women little else. Others see it as a gilded constraint, hours of effort and discomfort spent shaping the body into a fashionable cage, and the truth lies somewhere between, a pleasure and a prison laced together up the back of the same gown. The gong sounds again. It is time to go down. You descend the great staircase slowly, one gloved hand on the cool banister, into the murmur and glow of the gathering below. The guests are assembling in the drawing room before dinner, and as you enter, you step into a warm sea of candlelight and conversation, of silk and black evening coats, of the soft clink of glass and the low music of well-bred voices. Introductions are made. You are presented to those you do not know, and you find your place in the slow, pleasant eddy of talk while you wait. There is a particular art to this waiting, this graceful idleness before the meal, and you fall into it as into a familiar dance. Here's a mainstream fact about the ritual that is about to unfold. The formal Victorian dinner was one of the most elaborate ceremonies of the age, governed by rules of such precision that to get them wrong was to mark yourself irreparably as not quite a person of breeding. There was a strict order in which the guests would go into dinner, arm in arm, by rank, the highest first, and a gentleman would be told beforehand which lady he was to take in, where you sat, whom you sat beside, how the procession formed. All of it was determined in advance by the iron law of precedence, and all of it was watched. And then the butler appears at the door and announces in grave tones that dinner is served, and the careful procession forms, each gentleman offering his arm to his appointed lady, and the company moves, 2 by 2, through the great doors and into the dining room, where the long table waits, ablaze. Here's a quirky tidbit about that blazing table. The Victorian dinner table was a stage set of staggering opulence, and its centerpiece was light and silver and flowers. Branched candelabra cast a warm, flattering glow, an array of glittering silver, more forks and spoons and strange specialized implements than any newcomer could name, flanked each place, and down the center ran an elaborate decoration of flowers and fruit and ornament, sometimes so tall and so dense that guests on opposite sides of the table could scarcely see one another. You sat down before a small fortune in silver and crystal, and you were expected to navigate it all without the slightest hesitation, as though you had never in your life eaten any other way. You take your place, and the great meal begins to unfold, course after course after course, carried in by silent footmen, each dish offered at your left, each plate whisked away the moment you have done. The talk flows, the wine is poured, the candles burn down by slow degrees, and you settle into the long, warm river of the dinner, where nothing is hurried and nothing is wanting, and the world has narrowed to this golden room and the pleasant murmur of the people in it. Some historians argue that these dinners were the supreme social art of the Victorian elite, a nightly masterpiece of food, conversation, and ceremony. Others see them as monuments to excess, a parade of waste in a world where so many went hungry. And the truth lies somewhere between a beautiful art and a quiet excess, served on the same silver dishes. The last course is cleared, and the ladies rise to withdraw. There comes a moment, near the end of every dinner, when the hostess catches the eyes of the ladies down the length of the table, and at her small signal, the women rise. This is the famous parting of the sexes after dinner, an institution so settled that no one thought to question it. The ladies withdraw. That is where the word drawing room comes from, leaving the gentlemen to their wine and their cigars and their franker talk. And so you rise with the others, and the gentlemen rise too, and the women process out together, leaving the men alone around the wreck of the great meal, and the evening divides itself for a while into 2 separate worlds. Here's a mainstream fact about this curious custom. The withdrawal of the ladies served several purposes at once. It allowed the gentlemen to drink their port, smoke, and turn to subjects, politics, business, coarser jokes, deemed unsuitable for female ears, and it gave the ladies their own hour in the drawing room, a time for coffee and quieter, more intimate conversation among themselves. It was, in its way, a daily ritual of separation, drawing a clear line between the male and female spheres that the Victorians held so dear, and it could last anything from a quarter hour to a long, slightly impatient wait, depending on how much the gentlemen were enjoying their wine. In the drawing room, the atmosphere softens, coffee is brought, the ladies settle into the deep chairs and sofas, and the talk grows easier, warmer, more confiding than it could ever be at the mixed table. There is gossip, gentle and not so gentle. There is the comparing of news. There is beneath it all the quiet female business of the house party, the weighing of matches and prospects and reputations that was so much of what these weekends were truly for. Here's a quirky tidbit about what the gentlemen got up to in the meantime. Left to themselves, the men did not always linger long over high politics. The port circulated, always to the left, by ancient custom, and woe betide the man who passed it the wrong way. Stories were told that grew less proper as the decanter emptied, and there was the small, undignified matter of the necessary relief after so much wine, which certain dining rooms quietly provided for with a discreet chamber pot kept in the sideboard for the gentleman's convenience, so that no one need leave the room. The dignity of the great dinner had, it turned out, a very practical underside. You sit among the ladies in the soft lamplight of the drawing room, a cup of coffee cooling in your hands, listening to the gentle current of the talk, feeling pleasantly tired and pleasantly full and pleasantly far from every care. And in time, the door opens, and the gentlemen rejoin you, a little flushed, a little merrier, and the two worlds of the evening fold back into one. Some historians argue that this separation gave women a precious sphere of their own, a space of female solidarity and real is hidden influence. Others see it as one more way the age boxed women out of power, sending them off to their coffee while the men decided the things that mattered. And the truth lies somewhere between, a refuge and a banishment, entered through the same drawing-room door. The company reunites, and the evening turns to music. When the gentlemen have rejoined the ladies, the long first evening drifts, by gentle custom, toward music. For in an age before recorded sound, before the wireless, before any of the easy entertainments we now take for granted, the music of a country house evening was made by the guests themselves. Someone is persuaded to the piano, someone else is coaxed into singing, and the company arranges itself in the soft lamplight to listen, the candles burning low, the great windows dark now with the fallen night, the music rising and filling the beautiful room. Here's a mainstream fact about why so many young ladies could play. Musical accomplishment was considered an essential part of a genteel young woman's education, the piano above all, and singing, and perhaps the harp. A lady was expected to be able to perform gracefully for the pleasure of a drawing room, and years of her girlhood were spent in practice toward exactly this moment. These accomplishments were not pursued for any career, of course. A lady never performed for money, but as ornaments, as proofs of refinement, and not least as quiet advertisements of her charms to any gentleman who might be watching and weighing her as a wife. And so the music unfolds, one performer following another, the familiar songs and sonatas of the age filling the air. Some of the playing is very fine, some is merely willing, and all of it is received with the same warm, encouraging murmur, for the point is not perfection, but participation, the pleasant weaving together of the company to shared and simple pleasure. Here's a quirky tidbit about these musical evenings. The performances were watched with an attention that went far beyond mere appreciation of the music. A young lady at the piano was in a very real sense on display, and her playing was judged not only for its skill, but for the grace of her posture, the elegance of her hands, the modesty of her manner, the whole composing into an impression of her suitability. A clever mother might steer her daughter to the instrument at exactly the right moment, when a desirable gentleman was near enough to be charmed. The drawing-room, for all its softness, never quite stopped being a marketplace. You sit among the listeners in the warm, dark room, the music washing over you, the long day of travel and arrival and dining settling at last into a pleasant weariness behind your eyes. The candles gutter, the voices grow softer, and one by one the company begins to think of bed. Some historians argue that these domestic musical evenings were a golden age of amateur music making, filling ordinary homes with live performance in a way our recorded age has lost. Others note how heavily the burden of accomplishment fell on women trained from girlhood to perform and please. And the truth lies somewhere between, a genuine joy and a gentle duty played out at the same piano. The last song ends. Candles are lit to carry up to bed, and the first night of the weekend draws gently to its close. The company drifts apart by slow degrees, as the company always does, with murmured good nights and the soft business of bedward movement. A footman stands ready with a row of bedroom candlesticks, each guest taking up a small flame to light the way upstairs, for the great house at night is a place of shadow and vast darkness, its corridors stretching away into black, its many rooms silent and still. You take your candle, and you say your good nights, and you climb the great staircase that loomed so grand by daylight, and is now a thing of moving shadow and creaking stair, your small flame throwing your shadow huge upon the walls. Here's a mainstream fact about the darkness of these houses by night. Before electric light reached the country houses, and it came late to many of them, the night was genuinely, profoundly dark, lit only by candle and lamp, and the great houses after the company retired were places of deep shadow and silence. Servants moved through the dark with practiced ease. Guests, less sure of the geography, sometimes did not. The candle you carried was not a quaint touch, but a real necessity. Your single small defense against a darkness our well-lit age can scarcely imagine. You reach your room at last, and the fire has been kept in, glowing low and red in the grate, and the bed has been turned down, and a warming pan has perhaps been passed between the sheets, so that the bed is warm when you climb into it. Your maid comes to undress you, to take down your hair, to free you at last from the corset and the gown, and there is a deep animal relief in being released from all of it, in standing in your nightgown in the firelight, your own body your own again. Here's a quirky tidbit about the famous nocturnal life of the country house. The corridors of a great house at night had, in certain fast circles, a quiet reputation, with husbands and wives often lodged in separate rooms, and discretion the supreme social virtue. The small hours were known to see a certain gentle traffic, a softly opened door, a candle shielded by a hand, a swift passage along a darkened corridor. It was all conducted with such elaborate tact that nothing was ever officially seen, and the great unspoken rule was simply that whatever happened in the dark must leave no trace by morning. The house knew. The house always knew, and the house said nothing. You climb into the warm bed at last and lie listening to the great house settle around you. A distant door, the wind in the old trees outside, the small tick and shift of an old building in the night. You are far from home, in a strange grand room, beneath a roof that has sheltered strangers for generations. And there is a deep peace in it, a sense of being held, for one night, inside something vast and old and kind. Some historians argue that the separate bedrooms and discreet customs of these houses gave the Victorian elite a private freedom quite at odds with their public morality. Others caution against making too much of the gossip, noting that most weekends were exactly as respectable as they appeared, and the truth lies somewhere between, propriety and its quiet exceptions, sleeping under the same dark roof. The fire sinks to embers, and you fall at last into the deep sleep of the well-fed and the far from home. You wake slowly in the strange grand bed to a soft gray light and the small sounds of a great house coming to life. A maid has come in quietly to rekindle the fire and draw the curtains, and the room is filling with the pale gold of a country morning. Beyond the tall window the park stretches away, the lake silver under the early haze, the great trees standing in their long shadows. There is no hurry to any of it, for one of the chief pleasures of the country house morning was its gentleness, its lack of fixed obligation, the slow easing of the company into the day. Here's a mainstream fact about how breakfast worked in these houses. Unlike the rigid ceremony of dinner, the country house breakfast was a famously informal, come-as-you-please affair. A long sideboard in the breakfast room would be laden with a great array of dishes, kept warm over spirit lamps. Eggs and bacon, kidneys and kedgeree, cold meats and fish, breads and preserves. And guests would drift down as they woke, help themselves, and settle where they liked. There was no procession, no precedence, no fixed hour. After the formality of the night before, breakfast was a small holiday of ease. You make your way down at your own pace, dressed now in a simpler morning gown, and you find a few others already gathered, the room bright with morning sun, the smell of coffee and bacon and toast warm in the air. You help yourself from the glittering sideboard, you find a place by the window, and you begin the slow, pleasant business of an unhurried breakfast among amiable company. Here's a quirky tidbit about the Morning Post. One of the small rituals of the country house morning was the arrival of the letters. The post was a serious matter, brought in and distributed, and a guest might receive news from the wider world, invitations, gossip, the whole correspondence of an age that ran on letters as ours runs on screens. Some guests would retreat to the writing room to answer their letters at once, for the volume of correspondence a fashionable person was expected to keep up was enormous. A steady daily tide of notes and replies and thank yous and arrangements, all in the careful hand the age demanded. You linger over your coffee, watching the morning brighten over the park, listening to the easy talk of the table, feeling the deep restfulness of a day with nothing required of you. The plans for the day are loosely laid. The gentlemen will shoot, perhaps, or ride. The ladies will walk or write, or simply be idle in the most beautiful surroundings imaginable. And the whole golden Saturday stretches ahead, unhurried, unburdened, entirely yours. Some historians argue that this studied informality was itself a luxury, the freedom from routine that only great wealth could buy. Others note that beneath the ease lay a rigid structure still, the day's pleasures planned, the servants laboring unseen to make the idleness possible. And the truth lies somewhere between, true ease and hidden effort, served together at the breakfast sideboard. The meal winds down, and the day's pursuits begin to take shape. By mid-morning, the great enterprise of the day declares itself, and the gentlemen prepare to go out with their guns. The shooting party was for many men the very heart of the country house weekend, the reason the great estates were maintained, the chief sport of the season, a passion that consumed enormous time and money and care. And so the morning fills with the particular bustle of departure. The gentlemen in their tweeds and stout boots, the guns brought out and inspected, the dogs milling and eager, the gamekeepers and beaters gathering, the whole small army of the shoot assembling on the gravel before the house. Here's a mainstream fact about the scale of Victorian shooting. By the later 19th century, the country house shoot had become an industry of astonishing proportions. The states employed gamekeepers year-round to rear vast quantities of game birds, pheasants and partridges raised in their thousands, purely so that they could be driven on the appointed days toward the waiting guns. A single day's shooting at a great house might see hundreds, even thousands of birds brought down, and the size of the bag became a matter of fierce pride and competition among the sporting gentry. What looked like ancient rustic sport was in fact a highly organized modern enterprise, run with the precision of a business. The gentlemen set off across the park, and the house grows quieter behind them, and presently from the woods and fields beyond there comes the distant rhythmic sound of the guns, the soft, far-off popping, rising and falling through the morning air, the music of the shoot drifting back to the house. Here's a quirky tidbit about the elaborate ritual of it all. The shoot had its own intricate etiquette, as binding in its way as the rules of the dining room. There were rules about safety, about where a man might point his gun, about the order of the guns along the line, about the all-important matter of not poaching a bird that was properly another man's to shoot. To breach this code was a serious social offense, and a man who shot dangerously or greedily could find himself quietly never invited again. The pleasures of the country house, even the loud and muddy ones, were hedged about with rules. You watch from a terrace or a window as the shooting party dwindles into the distance, and you feel the house settle into its quieter daytime rhythm, the men gone to their sport, the ladies left to a gentler day. There is a pleasant peace in it, the sense of a household at its leisure, each part of the company pursuing its own appointed pleasure under the wide, soft country sky. Some historians argue that the shoot was the true purpose of the country estate, the sport around which the whole social and economic machine of the great house revolved. Others see it as a vast, wasteful slaughter, thousands of hand-reared birds killed for a single day's amusement. And the truth lies somewhere between, a beloved tradition and a strange excess, echoing together across the autumn fields. The guns fade into the distance, and the ladies turn to the pleasures of their own morning. With the gentlemen gone to their guns, the ladies are left to the gentle, formless pleasures of a country morning, and the house grows soft and unhurried around them. There is no single thing you must do, and that is precisely the luxury of it. Some of the ladies settle in the morning room with their needlework and their letters. Some take up a book in the library. Some gather in twos and threes to talk. And some, the more energetic, prepare for a walk in the grounds. The morning is yours to shape within the gentle bounds of what a lady might properly do, and the hours pass in a pleasant, dreamy idleness. Here's a mainstream fact about how a lady was meant to fill her days. For all the freedom of a country morning, a lady's life was bounded by a clear sense of suitable occupation. She might read, write letters, sketch, paint in watercolors, do fine needlework, arrange flowers, play music, walk in the garden, or pay and receive calls. What she could not do was anything that smacked of real work, or trade, or unfeminine exertion. Her days were to be filled with graceful, ornamental, useful-seeming activity that nonetheless produced nothing the world required. Idleness was her privilege, and in a way her prison. You choose, perhaps, to walk, and you step out through the great glass doors onto the terrace and down into the gardens, and the morning air is cool and green and full of the smell of cut grass and roses and damp earth. The gravel paths wind between clipped hedges and bright borders. The great park rolls away beyond, and the only sounds are bird song and the distant murmur of the chute and the soft crunch of your own feet on the path. Here's a quirky tidbit about the gardens you walk through. The gardens of a great Victorian house were often staggeringly elaborate and staggeringly expensive, maintained by armies of gardeners to produce a beauty that was almost entirely for show. There might be glasshouses growing pineapples and grapes and exotic flowers in the English cold. There might be vast carpet bedding schemes, intricate patterns of brightly colored plants laid out like living embroidery, requiring tens of thousands of plants raised each year and torn out each season. The casual loveliness you strolled through was the product of relentless, hidden, year-round labor by men whose names you would never learn. You walk the winding paths in the green morning quiet, your skirts brushing the dewy edges of the borders, your mind drifting pleasantly with nothing to anchor it, and you feel the deep restorative peace of a beautiful place and an empty hour. This, you think, is what the weekend was for, this gentle, golden, purposeless ease, so rare in any life, so precious for being rare. Some historians argue that these idle accomplishments gave women a rich inner and creative life within their narrow sphere. Others see the enforced idleness as a profound waste of female intelligence and energy, a gilded confinement. And the truth lies somewhere between, a cultivated peace and a quiet imprisonment growing in the same beautiful garden. The morning ripens toward noon, and a bell calls the company to luncheon. For some of the company, the morning calls not for needlework or letters, but for the open air and the back of a horse. And you may find yourself drawn out toward the stables with the riding party. The stables of a great house were a small kingdom in themselves, a long range of buildings about a cobbled yard, smelling of hay and leather and the warm, sweet breath of the horses. Here lived the carriage horses and the hunters and the ladies' gentle mounts, tended by grooms and stable boys who rose before dawn. And here the morning ride was made ready. The horses led out gleaming and groomed, the side saddle set for you. The whole pleasant ritual of the country gentry's first great love unfolding in the cool of the day. Here's a mainstream fact about riding in the lady. For a gentlewoman, Riding was one of the very few vigorous pursuits she might properly enjoy, and she undertook it in a manner that seems, to us, scarcely possible. Perched sideways upon a side saddle, both legs to one side, in a long, heavy habit, controlling a large animal at speed in a posture that demanded real strength and balance and nerve. It was an art learned in girlhood and carried with pride, and a lady who rode well was admired for a kind of daring grace that the rest of her hemmed-in life so rarely allowed her to show. You are helped up to the saddle, and you arrange your long skirts, and the little party moves off out of the cobbled yard and into the soft green morning, the horses' hooves muffled on the turf, the dew still bright on the grass, the great park opening before you in all its dewy stillness. There is a freedom in it that nothing else in your day affords, the wind in your face, the motion beneath you, the wide world rolling past. Here's a quirky tidbit about the perils of the side saddle. Riding aside was not merely uncomfortable, it could be genuinely dangerous. For a lady whose horse fell or bolted could become entangled in her saddle and her habit in ways that made a clean dismount nearly impossible. There were real and well-known accidents, and yet the convention held absolutely. For a woman to ride astride, like a man, was thought unthinkably indecent. So the ladies rode sideways, gracefully and at hazard, and bore the risk as they bore the corset and the long skirts, as simply one more price of being correct. You ride out through the park in the green morning, past the lake and the great trees, the house falling away behind you, and for a little while you taste something close to liberty, the gentle thunder of the hooves and the rush of the air, sweeping the last of the morning stillness from your mind. And then the party turns, in time, back toward the house and the duties of the day. Some historians argue that riding gave Victorian women a rare and precious arena of physical freedom and competence in lives otherwise hedged about with restriction. Others note that even this freedom was confined and made hazardous by the demands of decorum, the side saddle a fitting emblem of a liberty granted only on impossible terms. And the truth lies somewhere between a real freedom and a gilded restraint, riding out together across the morning park. The horses are led back to the yard, and the morning turns toward noon. On your way back to the house, you may pass through one of its quiet wonders, the great glass conservatory, where summer is kept alive all year by art and labor and heat. You step in from the cool morning, and the air changes at once, growing warm and moist, and heavy with the green breath of growing things. All around you rise plants that have no business in an English climate. Palms, ferns, and orchids, vines heavy with grapes, even perhaps the dark spiked crown of a pineapple ripening slowly in its pot. The glass rises overhead, dripping faintly, the light falling green and soft through the leaves, and the whole place hums with a hushed and tropical peace, a little stolen piece of the jungle held captive under English glass. Here's a mainstream fact about these glass palaces. The conservatory and the heated glasshouse were among the great enthusiasms of the wealthy Victorian, made possible by new techniques of building in iron and glass, and by the abolition of an old tax on glass that had once made it ruinously dear. The grandest estates competed to grow the most exotic and difficult things, out-of-season fruit, rare flowers, and above all the pineapple, that supreme symbol of wealth and hospitality, which could cost a small fortune to raise in the English cold, and was displayed at the dinner table as a proud trophy as much as a food. You wander the warm green aisles, brushing the broad leaves, breathing the rich damp air, the gravel soft beneath your feet, and there is a dreamlike quality to it, this summer garden flourishing, while the true seasons turn outside the glass. It is beauty made by sheer force of money and care, a small impossible paradise tended by gardeners you will never see. Here's a quirky tidbit about the prized pineapple. So precious and so prestigious was the homegrown pineapple that some were not eaten at all but merely displayed, passed from dinner to dinner as the centerpiece of the table, even rented out by the day to those who wished to impress their guests with a fruit they could not themselves afford to grow. A single pineapple could stand at the heart of a grand dinner as a glittering proof of the host's wealth and reach, admired and envied, and very often never tasted, until at last it began to spoil and was, with some regret, finally cut. You linger a moment longer in the warm green hush, reluctant to step back into the ordinary air, and then you pass on out of the glass and into the cool of the morning, carrying with you the strange sweet memory of summer kept prisoner under glass. The house waits ahead, and the bell for luncheon will soon be ringing. Some historians argue that these glass houses were marvels of Victorian ingenuity, and a genuine flowering of horticultural art and science. Others see them as monuments to absurd extravagance, fortunes spent to grow a single fruit out of season for the sake of show. And the truth lies somewhere between, a true wonder and a costly vanity, ripening together beneath the same dripping glass. You step out into the morning air, and the bell calls you into luncheon. Luncheon, when it comes, is a lighter, easier meal than the great ceremony of dinner, and the company gathers for it in good spirits. The gentlemen may have come in from the shoot, ruddy and hungry and full of the morning's sport, or luncheon may be carried out to them in the field, a movable feast spread in a barn or under the trees. For the ladies and those who remained, it is taken in the house, an informal affair of cold meats and pies and fruit, with talk of the morning and plans for the afternoon. The rigid rules relax at midday. This is the loosest, friendliest meal of the country house day. Here's a mainstream fact about the rhythm of meals in these houses. The Victorian country house day was organized above all around food, a steady procession of meals and refreshments that punctuated the hours and gave shape to the formless leisure. Breakfast, then perhaps a light midday luncheon, then the sacred ritual of afternoon tea, then the great climax of dinner, and sometimes a late supper besides. To be a guest was to be fed, almost continuously, with a generosity that was itself a form of display. The groaning table a constant edible proof of the family's wealth and the warmth of its welcome. After luncheon comes the long, soft heart of the afternoon, the most idle and golden stretch of the whole golden day. The shooting may resume. The ladies may drive out in carriages to see some local beauty, some ruin or view or neighboring house, or the whole company may simply scatter to its own quiet pleasures, to rest and read and walk and let the warm hours drift. Here's a quirky tidbit about the afternoon drive. A favorite afternoon amusement was the carriage excursion, a gentle, scenic drive through the surrounding country, perhaps to a picturesque ruin or a famous view, where the party might descend to admire the scenery, exclaim over its beauty, and perhaps sketch it. There was a whole cult of the picturesque in the age, an educated appreciation of romantic landscape, and a well-bred person was expected to be moved in the correct way by the right kind of view. Even the admiring of scenery, it seems, had its etiquette. You spend the long afternoon in whatever gentle way pleases you. A drive through the soft country, a book in a shaded corner of the garden, a quiet hour by the lake, watching the water and the swans. The light slants golden through the great trees, the heat of the day softens toward evening, and the deep peace of the country house afternoon settles over you like a warm and weightless blanket. Some historians argue that this leisure was a genuine art of living, a cultivated capacity for pleasure and contemplation that our hurried age has lost. Others see in it a vast and unjust idleness, a few thousand people drifting through golden afternoons on the labor of millions. And the truth lies somewhere between, a beautiful art and a quiet injustice, drowsing together through the same long afternoon. The light grows long and amber, and the hour of tea approaches. As the afternoon softens toward evening, the most beloved of all the day's rituals quietly arrives, the hour of afternoon tea. The company gathers, indoors in the drawing room, or out upon the terrace or the lawn, and the tea things are brought. The silver teapot and the delicate cups, the tiered stands of thin bread and butter, of little sandwiches and cakes and scones, the whole pretty apparatus of the most charming meal of the English day. There is a particular gentleness to the tea hour, a lowering of the day's pace, a drawing together of the company in the soft amber light before the long business of dressing and dining begins again. Here's a mainstream fact about where this beloved custom came from. Afternoon tea as a social ritual was a relatively recent invention, often credited to one Anna, the Duchess of Bedford, in the earlier part of the century, who is said to have called for tea and a light snack to bridge the long, hungry gap between an early luncheon and a late dinner. Whatever its precise origin, the custom spread swiftly through fashionable society and became by the high Victorian age an established institution, a daily ceremony of refreshment and conversation that has endured in its way to this very day. The tea is poured by the hostess or some favored lady, an honor and a small art in itself, and the cups are passed, and the company settles into the easy, intimate talk that the tea hour invites. It is less formal than dinner, more relaxed than the morning calls, a golden in-between hour in which the day seems to pause and breathe before its grand finale. Here's a quirky tidbit about the etiquette of the teacup. Even this gentlest of meals had its rules, of course, and they could be surprisingly precise. There was a correct way to hold the cup, a correct way to stir, a correct way to take milk and sugar. There were rules about which cakes might be taken with the fingers, and which required a fork. There was even quiet judgment passed upon whether one poured the milk before or after the tea, a question that could, in certain circles, mark one's breeding as surely as one's accent. The teacup, that small and homely thing, was one more little stage on which the endless performance of gentility was played. You sit with your cup of tea in the warm amber light of the late afternoon, a small cake upon your plate, the easy talk flowing around you, the long shadows stretching across the lawn. There is a deep and simple contentment in it, this gentle pause in the gentle day, and you feel the weekend wrapping you in its warmth, holding you for a few golden hours more, far from every care. Some historians argue that afternoon tea was a small triumph of civilization, a daily ritual of grace and rest in a hurried world. Others note that it too was hedged with rules and judgments, one more test a person might pass or fail. And the truth lies somewhere between, a true comfort and a quiet examination, poured from the same silver pot. The cups are cleared, and the company drifts upstairs to dress for the great Saturday dinner. For those who wish in gentler amusement in the long afternoon, the lake waits below the house, silver and still, with its little boats drawn up at a wooden landing. You walk down through the gardens to the water's edge, and a gentleman hands you tearfully into a small rowing boat, and you settle among the cushions while he takes the oars, and with a soft push you glide out onto the glassy water. The house rises above you on its slope, golden in the afternoon light. The great trees lean over the banks. A pair of swans moves off with stately disdain, and the only sounds are the dip and drip of the oars and the small lap of water against the hull. It is a scene from a painting, and you are, for this gilded hour, inside it. Here's a mainstream fact about the lakes of these estates. The serene natural lake before a great house was very often no natural thing at all, but a vast and costly work of engineering. A stream dammed, a valley flooded, the very contours of the land reshaped to create a sheet of water, exactly where the eye most wished to find one. The fashionable landscape gardeners of the previous century had made the artificial lake a central feature of the English park, and what looked like a gift of nature was in truth a triumph of money and design, dug out by hundreds of laborers to please the eye of the family above. The boat glides on across the still water, and you trail one gloved hand over the side into the cool, and watch the ripples spread and fade, and feel the deep peace of the afternoon settle into your very bones. There is nothing to do here but drift and look and be, and that you are learning is the rarest luxury this golden world affords. Here's a porky tidbit about these ornamental waters. The great estate lakes were not merely for beauty and boating. They were stocked with fish for the table and for sport, graced with islands built purely for effect, and sometimes adorned with little temples or grottos or follies, charming, useless buildings set about the ground simply to delight the eye and give a destination to a walk. A family might build a miniature Greek temple on a hill, or a romantic mock ruin by the water, spending real money to construct something that had no purpose at all beyond being pleasant to come upon. The whole landscape was a kind of vast outdoor drawing room, arranged for pleasure down to the last contrived view. You step at last from the boat back onto the landing, your hand taken to steady you, the cushions left rocking gently behind, and you climb back up through the gardens toward the house with the soft light of the water still in your eyes. The afternoon is wearing on, the hour of tea approaches, and the day is gathering itself slowly toward the splendor of the evening. Some historians argue that these designed landscapes were among the supreme achievements of English art, beauty composed on the scale of whole valleys. Others see them as the ultimate vanity of wealth, nature itself rebuilt to flatter a family's eye. And the truth lies somewhere between, a sublime art and a boundless vanity, moored together in the still lake water. You climb the slope toward the house, and somewhere within, the tea is being laid. There is a room in the great house that you come to love above all the others, and it is the library, a long, hushed, book-lined sanctuary where the noise of the party falls away and a deep peace reigns. You push open the heavy door, and the smell meets you first. Old leather and paper and beeswax, the particular dim sweetness of a room full of books and years. The walls rise in tiers of bound volumes behind their gilded grills. Deep chairs stand about the cold or quiet hearth. A great globe gleams in a corner, and the light falls soft and amber through tall windows onto the worn carpet. It is a room made for stillness, and you sink into a chair by the window with a book, and the long quiet hour opens before you like a gift. Here's a mainstream fact about the country house library. The library of a great house was often a genuine treasure, built up over generations into a collection of real scholarly worth. But it was also, like so much else, a statement. A wall of finely bound books announced the family's learning, taste, and gentility, whether or not those books were ever read. Some libraries were the cherished working rooms of genuinely bookish families. Others were beautiful, untouched displays, the volumes bought by the yard for their handsome spines. The room said, "We are cultivated people," and that, as much as any love of reading, was its purpose. You turn the pages slowly in the amber light, the great house murmuring faintly far off, the afternoon sun moving by slow degrees across the carpet, and you feel the deep restorative quiet of a room built for the mind at rest. Here, more than anywhere, you feel the weekend's gift of time, the rare, unhurried space in which to simply sit and read and think and be. Here's a quirky tidbit about the books themselves. The bindings that lined these grand rooms could conceal surprises. Some libraries held shelves of false books, painted spines fixed to a door or a panel to disguise it, so that a whole hidden door might vanish into a wall of literature. And tucked among the respectable volumes of sermons and histories, many a great house library quietly held its forbidden corner, the locked cabinet or high shelf where the less proper books were kept, away from the eyes of the young ladies who were meant to read only what was suitable. Even the temple of learning had its secrets, hidden behind handsome spines. You read until the light begins to lengthen and gild, and then you close your book at last, reluctant, and rise from the deep chair, and leave the hushed room with a small backward glance, carrying its peace with you out into the gathering bustle of the approaching evening. The tea hour is near, the day is turning, and the library sinks back into its patient, ageless quiet behind you. Some historians argue that these libraries preserved learning and nurtured genuine intellectual life among the leisured class. Others see them as one more performance, books as furniture, culture worn like a fine coat. And the truth lies somewhere between true learning and pure display, shelved side by side behind the gilded grills. You step out into the corridor, and the smell of tea drifts toward you from the drawing room. High in the house, far above the grand rooms where the party laughs and dines, lies a world apart that the guests rarely see, the nursery, where the children of the family live their own quiet, separate lives. If you climb the stairs toward it, the grandeur falls away by degrees. The corridors grow plainer, the carpets thinner, until you reach the warm, slightly shabby, deeply private realm at the top of the house, where the children pass their days. Here is the day nursery, with its fire and its scattered toys, the night nursery with its little beds, the schoolroom where lessons are learned, a small, enclosed kingdom presided over not by the children's parents, but by the nanny and the nursery maids and the governess, who are the true daily companions of these small lives. Here's a mainstream fact about upper-class childhood that startles the modern heart. In a great Victorian household, children were very often raised at a considerable distance from their own parents, fed, washed, taught, comforted, and disciplined by servants, and brought down to see their mother and father only at certain appointed hours, scrubbed and dressed and on their best behavior. A child might spend far more time with its nanny than with its mother, and form its deepest early bond with a paid servant rather than a parent. This was not thought cruel. It was simply how the great world ordered things. The parents occupied with the vast machinery of their station, the children kept above in the warm separate world of the nursery. You look in, perhaps, at the children at their tea or their play, and they regard you with the grave curiosity of small creatures eyeing a visitor from the grown-up world below. And there is something both charming and faintly sad in this glimpse of childhood lived so far from the heart of the house. Here's a quirky tidbit about the famous figure of the nanny. The British nanny became an institution of her own, a beloved and powerful presence who could rule the nursery with absolute authority, and whose influence over her charges might last a lifetime. Grown men and women of the highest rank often remembered their old nanny with a tenderness they never quite felt for their distant parents, and a good nanny, once found, might stay with a family for decades, raising one generation after another. In the strange emotional economy of the great house, it was frequently the servant in the nursery, not the parent in the drawing room, who gave a child the warmth that we now think every childhood needs. You leave the nursery and descend again toward the grandeur below, the small warm world receding above you, and you carry with you a thoughtful, tender feeling, a glimpse behind the splendor at the quieter human truths it contained. The party reclaims you as you go down, the dressing hour approaches, and the great house turns its face once more toward the brilliance of the night. Some historians argue that this distance between parent and child was a genuine emotional deprivation, a coldness at the heart of privileged Victorian family life. Others note the real and lasting love that bound children to their nannies, and caution against judging another age by our own. And the truth lies somewhere between, a real distance and a real tenderness living together at the top of the house. You reach the grand floor again, and it is time, once more, to dress. The dinner of the Saturday night is the grandest of the weekend, the climax toward which the whole day has been quietly building, and the dressing for it is an event in itself. Once more you climb to your room in the fading light, and once more the long ceremony begins, the bath, the hair, the corset, the gown. But tonight the gown is your finest, the jewels your best, the whole assembly grander and more careful than the night before. For tonight there may be more guests, neighbors driven over for the great dinner, and the company will be at its most brilliant and most observed. You are dressing not merely for dinner, but for a kind of performance, and you know it, and the knowledge lends a particular care to every fastening. Here's a mainstream fact about the role of jewels in all this. For a lady of fortune, the jewels worn at a great dinner were a serious matter, not mere decoration, but a public statement of the family's wealth and standing, a portable fortune worn upon the body. Diamonds, above all, were the supreme display, and a great dinner might see a blaze of them about the throats and in the hair of the assembled ladies, glittering in the candlelight. The jewels were brought out from their cases and their banks for exactly such occasions, and a lady's parure, her matched set of stones, was among the most valuable things her family possessed, and among the most carefully watched. And so you stand once more before the long glass, while the maid works behind you, and you watch yourself transformed into something brilliant and remote, the candlelight catching the stones at your throat, the silk of your gown gleaming, your reflection a creature built for exactly this single golden evening and no other. Here's a quirky tidbit about the small anxieties of the grand toilette. For all the splendor, the hour of dressing was often one of quiet stress, even for the grandest ladies. There was the worry of the gown, whether it would do, whether it had been seen too often, whether some rival would outshine it. There was the lady's maid, upon whose skill the whole effect depended, and whose mood and competence could make or mar an evening. And there was the simple physical ordeal of it, the tight lacing, the heavy gown, the pins, the long hours ahead of sitting upright and correct. Beneath the serene and dazzling surface ran a current of effort and anxiety that the finished vision was designed entirely to conceal. At last you are ready, more splendid than you have ever been, and you stand for a moment looking at the stranger in the glass before the gong sounds below. There is a strange feeling in it, this nightly transformation, this dressing up as a finer and falser version of yourself. And then the deep note of the gong comes rising through the floors, and you take a breath, and you go down to the brilliant evening that waits. Some historians argue that this lavish display of dress and jewels was a kind of theater that gave meaning and beauty to aristocratic life. Others see it as a hollow competition, women set against women in an endless contest of finery. And the truth lies somewhere between, a glittering art and a quiet rivalry, fastened up the back of the same grand gown. The gong sounds, and you descend to the great dinner. Beneath the gentle surface of the weekend, in the soft hours among the ladies, runs a current that is the secret engine of it all, the endless, watchful, deadly serious business of gossip and matchmaking. For all its languor, a house party was never merely idle. In the drawing room after dinner, on the morning walks, in the murmured asides over tea, the real work of society went quietly forward. The weighing of marriageable young people, the noting of who paid attention to whom, the trading of intelligence about fortunes and prospects and reputations. And presiding over it with the keenest eyes in the house were the mothers, the matchmaking mothers, watching their daughters and the eligible gentlemen with the patience of generals and the precision of accountants. Here's a mainstream fact about why all this mattered so terribly. For a young woman of this class, marriage was very nearly the whole of her destiny. There was no career open to her, no respectable independence, and her entire future, her wealth, her rank, her very security, depended upon making a good match. The house party was one of the great hunting grounds for husbands, a place where eligible young people could be brought together under careful supervision, observed, and steered toward one another. The romance and the dancing and the music were real, but beneath them lay this hard, vital arithmetic upon which whole lives turned. You listen to the soft talk among the ladies, and you learn to read its currents, the meaningful glance, the careful question, the small kindness that is also a strategy, the gentle remark that carries, beneath its sweetness, a precise and wounding intelligence. There is real warmth here, and real friendship, and there is also a marketplace, conducted in murmurs in which young hearts are quietly bought and sold. Here's a quirky tidbit about the power of these whispering women. The gossip network of upper-class women was a genuine instrument of social power, and the verdict it passed could make or destroy a reputation as surely as any law. A young woman who put a foot wrong, who was too forward, who was talked about, who attracted the wrong kind of notice, might find herself quietly ruined by nothing more than the soft, relentless talk of the drawing room. Her marriage prospects withered, her name passed from house to house with a raised eyebrow. The men held the offices and the votes, but in the matter of reputation, it was the women who held the terrible unspoken power. You move among the talk, careful now, aware as never before of the eyes upon you and the judgments forming behind the smiles, and you understand a little more deeply the strange double nature of this golden world, its real warmth and its real watchfulness, its pleasure laid always over a foundation of relentless calculation. The afternoon wears on, the dressing hour nears, and the performance, you know now, never truly stops. Some historians argue that this female world of gossip and matchmaking was a genuine sphere of power, the one great arena in which women governed and decided. Others see it as a cruel and narrowing tyranny, women set to police one another in service of a system that confined them all. And the truth lies somewhere between, a real power and a real prison, whispered together in the same soft drawing room. The light begins to fade, and the house prepares for the evening. Before the dressing bell, in the soft amber lull at the close of the afternoon, you slip out alone for a turn upon the terrace, to taste a few quiet minutes entirely your own. The great stone terrace runs along the garden front of the house, broad and balustraded, with steps descending to the lawns and the long view beyond. The sun is low now, gilding the old stone, throwing your shadow long across the flags. The air is cooling, sweet with the evening scent of the gardens, and below you the park rolls away to the lake and the dark line of the trees, all of it bathed in the deep gold of the dying day. You walk slowly along the balustrade, your hand trailing the warm stone, and for a few rare minutes there is no one watching, nothing required, only the evening and the view and your own quiet thoughts. Here's a mainstream fact about the terrace and the garden front. The garden front of a great house, the side that faced the gardens in the park, away from the public approach, was where the family and their guests truly lived their outdoor life, and the terrace that ran along it was its stage. From here one surveyed the designed landscape, descended for a stroll, took the air between the day's appointed pleasures. The whole great composition of house and terrace and garden and park was arranged so that the family might stand exactly here, at exactly this hour, and look out upon a world made entirely beautiful for their eyes. You pause at the balustrade and lean upon the cooling stone and simply look at the gold light on the water, at the swallows wheeling, at the long shadows of the great trees stretching across the grass, and you let the deep peace of the hour sink into you, this brief solitude all the sweeter for being so rare in the crowded sociable days. A church bell, perhaps, sounds faintly across the fields. The light deepens from gold toward rose. Here's a quirky tidbit about these designed views. The Victorians, inheriting the great landscape parks of the previous age, had a passion for the carefully framed prospect, and the placing of a terrace, a bench, a window, a gap in the trees, was often calculated to capture one perfect view, a borrowed landscape of distant hills, a glimpse of the lake, a far church spire drawn into the composition as if it belonged to the estate. You were meant to come upon these views as if by chance and be moved by them, but they had been arranged, every one, by careful hands long ago, to give you exactly the feeling you are feeling now. You linger until the chill of the evening and the distant sound of the dressing bell call you in at last, and you turn from the gilded view with a small reluctant sigh and pass back through the great glass doors into the warmth and bustle of the house. The quiet minute is over. The evening's performance awaits, but you carry the gold light with you, a small private treasure, as you go up once more to dress, and ahead lies the grandest evening of them all. Some historians argue that these design landscapes gave their owners a genuine and refined communion with nature and beauty. Others note that even the view was a possession, nature itself enclosed and arranged for the pleasure of the few, and the truth lies somewhere between, a true beauty and a quiet ownership, glowing together in the last light on the terrace. The dressing bell sounds, and you turn, once more, toward the evening. As the light fades on the Saturday, the great house stirs with excitement. For tonight the party swells. Carriages are arriving up the long drive, bringing the neighbors and notables of the county to the grand dinner. You watch, perhaps, from a window as they come, the lamps of the carriages bobbing through the dusk, the horses sweeping up to the door, the new arrivals handed down in their finery and welcomed into the blazing hall. There the local great families, the squires and their wives, the rector, perhaps a visiting personage of some importance, all gathered for the chief social event of this corner of the country. The house, already grand, grows grander still with company, and a heightened sparkling energy runs through its rooms. Here's a mainstream fact about the social world of the county. Beyond the house party itself lay the wider society of the neighborhood, the network of landed families who formed the ruling order of each county, who knew one another across generations, intermarried, sat together on the bench as magistrates, and met at exactly such dinners and balls and hunts. A great house was not an island, but the chief seat of this county society, and to dine there when the neighbors were gathered was to take one's place in the whole intricate web of rural power and acquaintance that governed the land far from London. You are presented to the newcomers, and names and bows and curtsies are exchanged, and the drawing-room fills with a brilliant, unfamiliar company, the talk rising, the diamonds multiplying, the whole gathering swelling toward its glittering height. There is a particular thrill in a great mixed company like this, the sense of an occasion, of being present at something that matters in the small world of the county. Here's a quirky tidbit about these county gatherings. The arrival of the neighbors can set off the most delicate maneuverings of precedence and acquaintance, for the careful ranking of the county families was a matter of intense, if unspoken, importance. Who called upon whom first, who must be introduced to whom, which families were received and which quietly were not. All of this was tracked with the precision of a herald, and a single dinner could become a subtle battlefield of social standing, fought entirely with smiles, in which everyone present knew exactly the score, and no one ever said a word of it aloud. You moved through the brilliant gathering company, taking your part in the introductions and the talk, the candles blazing, the great hall full now of the rustle and shine of the assembled county, and you feel yourself caught up in the rising tide of the evening, swept toward the grand dinner that is its purpose and its crown. The butler will soon appear at the door, the procession will soon form, and the splendid machinery of the great dinner will begin once more to turn. Some historians argue that this county society was the true governing fabric of rural England, a living network of trust and kinship that ran the countryside for centuries. Others see it as a closed and jealous caste, a few families monopolizing land and power and shutting the door upon all others. And the truth lies somewhere between, a real community and a closed elite, gathering together under the blazing chandeliers. The drawing room fills to its brilliant height, and dinner is announced. The great Saturday dinner is the most splendid scene of the whole weekend, and as you enter the drawing room before it, you feel the heightened brilliance of the gathered company. There are more faces tonight. Neighbors and notables come for the occasion, and the room blazes with candlelight and diamonds and the deep black of the gentleman's evening dress. The talk is brighter, the laughter readier, the whole atmosphere keyed to a higher pitch. And presiding over it all, watchful behind her serene smile, is your hostess, who has spent the day in quiet labor to make this single evening perfect, and who carries in her head the intricate invisible diagram that is about to govern everything, the order of precedence. Here's a mainstream fact about that iron law. The seating at a great dinner was determined not by friendship, nor by who might most enjoy whom, but by the strict and ancient order of precedence, the precise ranking of every guest by their rank and title. The highest-ranking gentleman took in the highest-ranking lady and sat at the hostess's right, and so it descended, in exact order, down the table. To seat a duke below a baron, or to send a lady into dinner on the wrong arm, was not a small slip but a real offense, capable of giving genuine insult and lasting injury. Working out the correct order for a large and mixed party was a genuine intellectual feat, and there were whole books devoted to the rules of it. The butler announces dinner, the procession forms, each gentleman with his appointed lady upon his arm, and the company moves in its careful order through to the great dining room, where the long table waits, even more dazzling than the night before, a river of silver and crystal and candle flame, banked with flowers, set for a feast of many courses. Here's a quirky tidbit about the perils of the placement. The rules of precedence could create real social agony. A man might find himself, evening after evening, condemned by his modest rank to take in some lady he found dull, while the charming companion he longed for went off on a grander arm. Hostesses agonized over the diagram, and a clever one might find small, daring ways to bend the rules for the sake of a livelier table. But she did so at her peril, for any guest who felt slighted in their precedence would remember it and resent it for a very long time. The most rigid rule of the dinner table was also often the most quietly hated. You take your appointed place beside your appointed companions, and the great meal begins to unfold in all its slow magnificence. Course upon course, wine upon wine, the candles burning down, the talk and laughter rising, the long brilliant evening at the very summit of its splendor. And you sit within it, gowned and jeweled and exactly placed, a small bright figure in a scene as carefully composed as any painting. Some historians argue that precedence gave society a stable, understood order, a peaceful way of arranging a world obsessed with rank. Others see it as the very essence of aristocratic absurdity, grown men and women genuinely wounded over who walked through a door first, and the truth lies somewhere between, a useful order and a foolish vanity, seated side by side at the same long table. The last course is cleared, and the evening turns once more to its pleasures. After the great dinner, the long Saturday evening opens out into its pleasures, and the company scatters by inclination through the lamplit rooms of the house. For tonight there is more than music. Card tables are set out for those who like to play. The billiard room draws the gentlemen and the bolder ladies to its green baize and its click of ivory. And in the long drawing room or the great hall, if the party is lively and the company willing, the carpets may be rolled back, and someone set to the piano, and an impromptu dance begun. The evening becomes a gentle carnival of small amusements, each guest free to drift toward the pleasure that suits them best. Here's a mainstream fact about the great Victorian passion for parlor games and cards. In an age of long evenings and no electronic entertainment, the social games of the drawing room were elaborate and beloved. There were card games of every kind, played sometimes for modest stakes. There were word games and guessing games, and the famous game of charades, acted out with much laughter and improvised costume. There were rounds of music and recitation. These were not the idle time fillers we might imagine, but a real and cherished art of sociability, a way the company entertained itself through the long dark hours with nothing but its own wit and energy. If there is dancing, you may find yourself swept into it, a waltz, a polka, a country dance, the music bright, the candlelight warm, the company turning and laughing across the cleared floor. There is a particular magic to such an impromptu dance, unplanned and unofficial, springing up from the high spirits of the evening, freer and gayer than the grand formal balls of the London season. Here's a quirky tidbit about the dancing and its dangers. Even an informal country house dance was watched with the keenest attention by the matchmaking mothers and the gossiping company. For the dance floor was one of the very few places where a young man and woman might speak closely, touch, and be alone together in plain sight. To dance too many times with the same partner was to declare an interest that everyone would remark. To dance not at all was its own quiet failure. The waltz in particular, with its close hold, had once been thought scandalously intimate, and even now it carried a charge of romance that no one quite ignored. The dance was a pleasure, and like so much else, a performance closely judged. You spend the long evening in the warm lamplit rooms, drifting from the card table to the music to the dance, the hours slipping by unmarked, the company merry and the house aglow. And gradually, as the night deepens, the energy softens, the games wind down, the music grows quieter, and the company begins once more to think of the candlesticks and the climb to bed. Some historians argue that these homemade amusements represent a lost art of sociability, a richness of shared pleasure our screen-lit age can hardly conceive. Others note how even the games serve the relentless business of courtship and status, play in the service of strategy. And the truth lies somewhere between, pure delight and quiet design, dealt from the same deck of cards. The candles are taken up, and the company climbs again to bed. While the music plays in the drawing room, another smokier pleasure draws part of the company down a corridor to the billiard room, a darker, more masculine sanctuary at the heart of the house's evening. You may drift there, if you are of a bold and modern set, and find it a place quite unlike the candlelit drawing room, a deep green table glowing under a low, focused light. The rest of the room sunk in shadow and the blue haze of cigar smoke, the soft click of the ivory balls, the low murmur and laughter of the players. Leather chairs stand about the walls. A faint warmth of brandy and tobacco fills the air, and there is an easy, club-like intimacy to it, a relaxing of the evening's stiffer rules among the green baize and the falling smoke. Here's a mainstream fact about the billiard room and its place in the house. The billiard room was, in the later Victorian great house, an established and almost sacred male retreat, a place where the gentleman might smoke and drink and talk freely, away from the ladies and the formality of the drawing room, was governed by elaborate rules, and was largely banished to such rooms and to the smoking room proper, for the smell of tobacco was thought offensive to ladies and ruinous to fine furnishings. The billiard room was thus a small enclave of male freedom within the house, with its own relaxed and faintly raffish air. You watch the slow, careful game unfold, the players leaning into the pool of light to make their shots, the balls clicking and rolling across the green, the talk drifting easy and low. And there is a restful pleasure in it, a quiet counterpoint to the brighter gaieties elsewhere in the house. Some of the ladies of the more modern sort take their turn at the table too, to murmurs of mild approval or mild scandal, depending on the company. Here's a quirky tidbit about the great Victorian fuss over smoking. So strong was the feeling against the smell of tobacco that the dedicated gentleman smoker might don a special smoking jacket and even a smoking cap before indulging, garments meant to absorb the smoke and be removed before he rejoined the ladies, so that the offending scent should not cling to his evening dress. Whole rooms, sometimes whole towers, were built onto great houses purely as smoking rooms, often placed far from the main rooms and the bedrooms. An entire architecture of avoidance grew up around the simple cigar, all to spare the ladies a smell the gentlemen could not do without. You leave the green-lit room at last, the smoke and the soft clicking falling behind you, and make your way back along the corridor toward the brighter rooms and the music, carrying with you the faint warm scent of cigars and the memory of the easy hour. The night is deepening, the great evening is winding slowly down, and soon the candlesticks will be taken up once more for the climb to bed. Some historians argue that these masculine retreats gave men a valued space of ease and frankness, the social heart of much real friendship and business. Others see them as one more wall raised between the sexes, one more room from which women were politely shut out. And the truth lies somewhere between, a welcome refuge and a quiet exclusion, hazed together in the same cigar smoke. You return toward the music, and the long evening draws toward its close. But there is a whole other world within this house, a world you have scarcely glimpsed, and tonight, as you sleep, it is still hard at work, the world below stairs. For every guest drifting idle through the golden weekend, there were several servants laboring, unseen and unthanked, to make that idleness possible. Beneath the grand rooms where you dined and danced ran a hidden network of kitchens and sculleries, of pantries and still rooms and servants' halls, of back stairs and narrow corridors, where an army of men and women worked through every hour of your leisure. The whole effortless magic of the house party rested upon their ceaseless, invisible toil. Here's a mainstream fact about the scale of that hidden world. A great country house might employ dozens of indoor servants, and a large house party swelled the labor enormously, for many guests brought their own valets and maids, who had to be housed and fed alongside the regular staff. There was a strict hierarchy among them, mirroring the one above, the butler and the housekeeper at the summit, then the cooks and the senior servants, down to the lowliest scullery maid and hall boy. They rose before the guests and went to bed long after them. They worked days that would horrify us now, and they did it all in near silence, trained to be invisible, to vanish into the walls the moment a guest appeared. Below stairs, the hours of the kitchen's greatest battle, the cook and her helpers laboring in the heat and clamor to send up course after perfect course, the footman carrying the dishes up the long stairs, everything timed to the minute, the whole operation conducted with the urgency of a campaign. And when at last the company rose from the table, the work was far from done. The washing up, the clearing, the laying for the morning, stretching on into the small hours. Here's a quirky tidbit about the lives of these hidden people. The servants had their own elaborate society below stairs, with its own rules of precedence as strict as anything above. The upper servants dined apart from the lower. The visiting valets and maids took their rank from the rank of their employers, so that a duke's valet outranked a baron's, even at the servants' table. They even had their own version of the same social rituals, their own etiquette, their own gossip, their own romances conducted in the brief stolen moments of their crowded days. The world below stairs was a perfect, shadowed mirror of the world above, with all its grandeur and all its rules, lived out by the people who made the grandeur possible. You lie warm in your bed, drifting towards sleep, and somewhere below you, in the lamplit depths of the house, the last servants are finishing the last tasks of the long day. The banking of the great range, the locking of the doors, the quiet preparing of all that the morning will require. They will be up before you. They are always up before you, and you will pass them tomorrow without quite seeing them at all. Some historians argue that service offered real security and even a kind of pride, a respected place in a great household. Others see it as a life of exhausting, dehumanizing toil in the shadow of unimaginable luxury. And the truth lies somewhere between security and servitude, dignity and exhaustion, lived out together in the world below stairs. The last lamp is dimmed, and the great house at last sleeps. Sunday morning in the country house wears a quieter, gentler face, for the Sabbath laid its hush even over the houses of pleasure. The shooting falls silent, the games are put away, the whole rhythm of the house slows and softens in observance of the holy day. The morning begins after a quiet breakfast, with the great Victorian institution of church-going, for no respectable household, however worldly the rest of the week, would dream of neglecting its Sunday devotions. And so the company prepares to go to church, in its sober Sunday best, the brilliant finery of the night before, exchanged for the quieter dignity the day required. Here's a mainstream fact about religion in these grand houses. The Victorian upper classes were, at least outwardly, a deeply church-going society, and the country house was bound up closely with the church. Many great estates had their own parish church close by, or even a private chapel within the house itself, and the family occupied a special pew, often grandly placed, that marked their position at the head of the local community. To attend church was not merely a private act of faith, but a public performance of respectability and of the family's leadership of the parish. And the guests, however little some of them may have felt it, were expected to attend. And so you walk, perhaps, with the company across the park to the little parish church, or file into the private chapel, and you take your place, and the old familiar service unfolds. The hymns, the prayers, the sermon, the deep quiet of an English Sunday morning. There is a peace in it, even for the unbelieving, a pause in the headlong pleasure of the weekend, to sit still and silent in an old, cool church. Here's a quirky tidbit about the country house pew. The family pew in the local church was often a remarkable thing, large, private, sometimes curtained, or raised above the rest of the congregation, occasionally even furnished with its own fireplace and comfortable chairs. From it the family looked down, quite literally, upon their tenants and servants, and the village poor gathered in the plainer seats below. The house of God, it turned out, had its own order of precedence too, as strict as any dinner table, written into the very pews, and the great family sat, on Sunday as on every other day, at the very top of it. You walk back across the park in the soft Sunday light, the service behind you, the bells perhaps still ringing faintly over the fields, and you feel the gentle melancholy that the last full day of any happy visit brings. For the weekend is turning now toward its end. Tomorrow you will leave, and there is a sweetness in these last quiet hours, a sense of golden time slipping gently through your fingers. Some historians argue that this church-going was the sincere expression of a genuinely religious age, faith woven into the fabric of every life. Others note the gulf between Sunday piety and the very worldly pleasures of the rest of the weekend, and call it hypocrisy. And the truth lies somewhere between, real faith and worldly habit, kneeling together in the same family pew. The bells fade over the fields, and the company turns toward its last long, lazy Sunday. Back from church, the ladies of the party drift, on the quiet Sunday morning, to the prettiest and most feminine room in the house, the morning room where the gentle business of the day begins. The morning room was the lady's own domain, a bright, cheerful room placed to catch the morning sun, furnished in lighter, softer taste than the grand staterooms, and given over to the quiet occupations of a gentlewoman's day. Here the mistress of the house dealt with her correspondence and her household affairs. Here the ladies gathered to write their letters, to sew, to read, to talk in the easy intimacy of their own company. The light falls warm through the windows, a fire burns low, writing things are set out upon the desks, and a soft, contented industry fills the pretty room. Here's a mainstream fact about the ceaseless tide of Victorian letter writing. In an age before the telephone, the letter was the very lifeblood of social existence, and a lady of standing might spend hours each day at her correspondence. There were invitations to send and answer, thank you notes to write, news to exchange with distant friends and family, household and charitable business to conduct, all of it in her own careful hand, all governed by elaborate rules of form and etiquette. The penny post and the astonishing frequency of deliveries, several a day in the towns, made this torrent of letters possible, and the writing of them was a real and demanding labor, the social management of a whole life conducted in ink. You settle at a little writing desk by the window and draw a sheet of paper toward you and dip your pen and begin, perhaps the all-important note to a friend, perhaps the first draft of the thank you your hostess will expect once you are gone. The pen scratches softly, the others murmur and rustle nearby. The Sunday light moves slow across the room. There is a deep, gentle peace in this shared quiet industry. Women at their writing in the morning sun. Here's a quirky tidbit about the secret language of letters. So central was correspondence, and so concerned were the Victorians with propriety, that whole elaborate conventions grew up around it. Rules about what paper and ink a lady might use, how a letter must be folded and addressed, even a kind of code in the placing of a stamp or the crossing of a page. And because postage was once charged to the receiver and by the sheet, frugal writers would cross their letters, writing first one way across the page and then turning it sideways to write again across their own lines, producing a dense lattice of words that the recipient had to puzzle out. A small monument to thrift that must have tested many a weary eye. You write until your letters are done and your hand is tired, and then you set down your pen and gaze out at the quiet Sunday park, the morning ripening toward noon, the gentle peace of the room wrapped close around you. The others finish their own letters, the talk rises softly again, and the long lazy Sunday stretches on, unhurried and serene. Soon the bell will call you to the Sunday luncheon, and the last full day of the golden weekend will drift toward its close. Some historians argue that this vast labor of correspondence was the true social work of women, the invisible thread that held families and friendships and whole networks together across the miles. Others see it as one more demand upon them, hours of obligation disguised as leisure, and the truth lies somewhere between, a true connection and a quiet duty, written out together in the morning light. You set down your pen, and the bell calls you into luncheon. The Sunday of a country house weekend has a flavor all its own. A slow, golden, slightly wistful day, hedged about by the quiet of the Sabbath and shadowed faintly by the knowledge of departure to come. There is no shooting on a Sunday, no boisterous sport. The day is given over to gentler things, to walks and talk and reading, to the long Sunday luncheon, to the simple pleasure of one another's company in the beautiful house. The pace is slower than ever, the mood softer, the whole party drawing a little closer together in these last unhurried hours before the weekend ends and scatters them again across the country. Here's a mainstream fact about the Victorian Sunday. The Sabbath was taken seriously across society, and a great many ordinary pleasures and labors were set aside in its observance. A quietness descended that could feel to some restful and holy, and to others merely dull. In the country house, this meant a deliberate slowing, a turning away from the noisier amusements toward conversation, contemplation, gentle exercise, and rest. For all the worldliness of these houses, the Sunday hush was real, and it gave the last day of the weekend its particular, faintly melancholy peace. You spend the long afternoon in the gentlest of ways, a slow walk through the park with a companion or two, a quiet hour with a book by the lake, an easy lingering over the Sunday luncheon, which is often a finer meal than the weekday midday fare. The talk turns reflective. The friendships of the weekend swiftly made feel suddenly precious as their end approaches. and over everything lies the soft amber light of a fine afternoon nearing its close. Here's a quirky tidbit about these swift weekend friendships. There was a peculiar intensity to the bonds formed at a country house party, friendships, flirtations, and romances that bloomed with startling speed in the hothouse of the shared weekend, only to be parted often by the Monday train. The very brevity of it lent the whole experience a heightened, almost dreamlike quality. People opened to one another more quickly than they would in the ordinary world, knowing the time was short, and many a real and lasting attachment, and many a fleeting and bittersweet one, had its beginning in the golden, doomed intimacy of a single country weekend. You sit by the lake in the long Sunday light, the water still and silver, a friend beside you, the great house glowing gold behind you in the lowering sun, and you feel the deep and gentle sadness of the last good hours of a happy time. The weekend has been a small perfect world, complete in itself, and it is ending now, as all such worlds must, and there is beauty in the very fact of its ending. Some historians argue that the enforced quiet of the Victorian Sunday was a precious thing, a weekly rest the modern world has lost to its cost. Others recall it as oppressive, a dreary clamping down on all the pleasures of life. And the truth lies somewhere between, a holy peace and a heavy dullness, descending together with the Sunday hush. The light grows long and golden, and the last evening of the weekend gathers in. The final evening of the weekend has a particular sweetness, gilded with the soft sadness of an ending, and the company gathers for the last dinner together with a warmth made keener by the knowledge that tomorrow they part. The dinner is a fine one still, though perhaps a touch less grand than the Saturday's climax, and the talk around the table runs warmer and freer than on the first stiff night, for the strangers of Friday have become, by the alchemy of the shared weekend, something like friends. There is laughter and reminiscence already of the weekend's small adventures, and the gentle melancholy that hums beneath every happy gathering as it nears its end. Here's a mainstream fact about the social bonds these weekends forged. The country house party was, for all its pleasures, a deeply serious instrument of the aristocratic world, and one of its chief functions was exactly this knitting together of the governing class. Over these shared meals and sports and evenings, the bonds were made and renewed that held the whole edifice of society together. Friendships, alliances, marriages, understandings, people who would govern the country together, marry into one another's families, and shape one another's lives, spent these weekends learning to know and trust one another. The warmth you feel on this last evening was not merely pleasant. It was the social glue of an entire ruling order, setting as you spoke. After dinner, the company gathers for one last evening in the drawing room. A little music, a little talk, a quiet game of cards, and there is a reluctance now to let the hours pass, a wish to hold the golden weekend a little longer before it slips away entirely. The candles burn, the talk softens, and one by one, with real regret, the guests begin to say the good nights that are also nearly goodbyes. Here's a quirky tidbit about the small sorrows of departure. So intense and so brief were these weekend intimacies that the partings could carry a surprising emotional weight. There was a whole gentle art of the leave-taking, the promises to write, to meet again in town, to repeat the visit, the exchange of small kindnesses, the lingering last conversations on the stairs, and there was beneath it the quiet understanding that some of these warm new friends one might never see again at all, that the little perfect world of the weekend was about to dissolve as completely as a dream, leaving only a memory and perhaps a letter or two behind. You take up your candle for the last time and climb the great staircase one final night, along the corridor grown familiar now, to the lovely room that has been yours and will not be yours tomorrow. You undress and let down your hair and stand for a moment at the window, looking out over the dark park toward the lake, and you feel the deep, soft sadness of a happy thing ending, and the deep, soft gratitude of having had it at all. Some historians argue that these bonds of the house party were the true and enduring substance of aristocratic power, more real than any law or office. Others see only privilege talking to privilege, a closed circle warming itself at its own fire, and the truth lies somewhere between, real human warmth and real exclusive power glowing together in the last evening's light. The candle gutters, and you climb for the last time into the great warm bed. You wake on the Monday to a changed feeling in the house, the soft, busy melancholy of a party breaking up, of guests preparing to scatter back into their separate lives. There is bustle now where there was idleness. Trunks are being packed and brought down. Carriages are being ordered for the trains. The long, lazy rhythm of the weekend has given way to the brisker tempo of departure. Breakfast is taken with one eye on the clock, the talk full of timetables and arrangements. The easy timelessness of the golden days suddenly broken by the hard edges of the ordinary world rushing back in. Here's a mainstream fact about the great business of leaving. The departure of a large house party was nearly as complex an operation as its arrival. A logistical feat of trunks and carriages and railway timetables, managed by the servants with practiced efficiency. Guests had to be conveyed to the right trains at the right times. Mountains of luggage had to be brought down, sorted and loaded, and the whole swollen household had to be gently deflated back to its ordinary size. For the servants, the days of a great party were the hardest of the year, and the morning of departure, for all its sadness above stairs, brought below stairs a weary, welcome relief. You complete your own packing, or rather your maid completes it for you, folding the gowns that gleam so brightly into the waiting trunks, and you make your last farewells to the new friends of the weekend, to the other guests, and at last, with real and proper gratitude to your hostess who has given you these golden days, and who stands now, gracious to the end, to see her guests away. Here's a quirky tidbit about the delicate matter of the tips. There was one small ordeal that haunted the departing guest, and it was the question of veils or tips to the servants. It was expected, indeed all but compulsory, that a departing guest would tip the servants who had attended them, and the sums could be considerable, enough to make a weekend at a grand house a genuinely expensive undertaking even for the rich. The amounts were governed by an unspoken etiquette of their own, and to tip too little was to be marked as mean, while to tip too much was vulgar. Any guest left a great house poorer than they had hoped, having paid in the end quite handsomely for the privilege of being so royally entertained. You take your leave at last, your gratitude spoken, your trunks loaded, and you step out once more onto the gravel of the great drive where you arrived. It seems so long ago and only days past. The house rises behind you, serene and vast, and already turning its attention away from you toward its own ongoing life, and the carriage that brought you waits to carry you away. Some historians argue that the elaborate courtesies of arrival and departure were a genuine and gracious art, the marks of a civilization that took human relations seriously. Others see in the business of veils and tips the hard cash truth beneath the gracious surface, the great house revealed at last as a luxury one paid for, and the truth lies somewhere between true grace and hard coin exchanged together on the morning of departure, and the great house begins to slip away. The carriage carries you back down the long winding drive, and you turn for one last look, and the great house slides slowly out of view behind its screen of ancient trees. The park rolls past in reverse now, the lake, the great trees, the grazing deer, the same beautiful landscape that welcomed you, bidding you a gentle farewell. And then the gates, and the lanes, and the little country station, and the train waiting to carry you back to the ordinary world you left behind on Friday, a lifetime and a weekend ago. You settle into your compartment, and the train pulls away, and the green country begins by slow degrees to give way again to the world of every day. Here's a mainstream fact about the strange afterglow of such a visit. The return from a country house weekend often brought a peculiar flatness, a gentle melancholy that the Victorians knew well, the come down after the golden intensity of the visit, the ordinary world looking suddenly drabber and smaller after the splendor one had briefly shared. It was a real and recognized feeling, this weekend wistfulness, and it speaks to how vivid and how dreamlike these visits were, how completely one could be transported for 2 or 3 days into a richer and more beautiful life that then, abruptly, was gone. You watched the country slide past the window, the great trees thinning, the fields giving way to villages and towns, and you let your mind drift back over the golden days behind you. The first sight of the house, the blaze of the great dinners, the music in the lamplit evenings, the long idle afternoons, the new friends, the soft sad Sunday. Already it is taking on the soft glow of memory, the rough edges smoothing, the whole becoming a single golden impression you will keep. Here's a quirky tidbit about how these visits lived on. The country house weekend did not truly end at the railway station. It continued for weeks afterward, in letters. The careful, prompt thank you note to one's hostess was an absolute social obligation, and beyond it flowed a whole correspondence among the weekend's company. The new friendships nurtured by post, the flirtations carried on in ink, the arrangements made for next meetings. The visit dissolved into letters, as so much of Victorian life did, the warm reality of those few days preserved and prolonged in a slow, patient medium of the written word. The train carries you on through the softening light, the rhythm of the wheels a gentle lullaby, the golden weekend receding behind you into the country dusk. You are tired, pleasantly, deeply tired, with the particular weariness of too much pleasure and too little sleep, and the swaying of the carriage and the fading of the day begin to draw your eyelids slowly down. Some historians argue that these visits were the great formative experiences of upper-class life, shaping tastes and friendships and marriages that lasted lifetimes. Others see them as gilded bubbles, beautiful and unreal, with no more substance than a pleasant dream. And the truth lies somewhere between, a lasting bond and a passing dream, carried home together on the evening train. The light fades from the windows, and the long day draws toward its end. And now, as the train carries you gently homeward through the gathering dusk, let the weekend begin to soften and blur, and let yourself begin at last to let go. Sleep approaches slowly, softly, like the country dark, settling over the fields outside the window. There is nothing more you need to do tonight. No gown to be laced into, no gong to answer, no rule to remember. The great performance of the weekend is over now. The trunks are packed, the goodbyes are said, and you are simply being carried gently through the dark, toward home and toward rest. Let your breathing slow. Let it grow deep and easy and unhurried, like the breathing of someone already half asleep. Let your shoulders sink down, away from your ears. Let the small held tensions of the day loosen and dissolve. There is no corset now, no stays, nothing holding you tight. Let your whole body soften and spread and grow heavy, sinking down into the warmth that holds you. You belong to no one tonight. There is no hostess to please, no precedents to observe, no eyes upon you weighing and judging. You do not have to be charming. You do not have to be elegant. You do not have to be anything at all. The audience has gone home. The candles are out, and you are alone at last, in the soft and private dark, where no one is watching, and nothing is required, and you may simply rest. Think, if you like, as you drift, of all the people who passed through those golden weekends and are gone now. The ladies in their gowns, the gentlemen in their black, the swift friendships and the soft, sad partings, the servants in the lamplit depths, all of them long vanished into the same kind dark that is gathering around you now. They rested as you are resting. They slept as you are about to sleep. A long, quiet thread of human rest, running back across all the years, and you are simply one more soul lying down upon it tonight. Your body feels calm. Your mind feels calm. Everything feels calm and safe and still. The train rocks gently, gently, and the dark country slides past, and there is nowhere you must be and nothing you must do but breathe and soften and sink. Let the images of the weekend fade now. Let the great house dim and dissolve, just a pale shape among dark trees growing fainter. Let the candlelit dinners blur into a soft, warm glow, and then into nothing. Let the music become a faint and distant echo, and then silence. Let the long avenue of trees, the silver lake, the golden afternoons, all of it grow soft and far away, just colors now, just the faintest impression, gently fading, gently letting you go. There is only the warmth around you now, and the slow rhythm of your own quiet breathing, and the soft and gentle dark carrying you down and down and down. Notice how heavy your body has become, how it sinks into the bed beneath you, held and safe and warm. Notice how your breath comes slower now, and slower, each one a little deeper, a little softer, drawing you down a little further towards sleep. There is nothing to hold on to. There is nothing to remember. You may let it all go gently, the way the carriage let go of the great house, the way the train let go of the country station, the way the day lets go of the light. If a thought drifts through, let it drift on by, like a carriage passing far off down a country lane, growing fainter and fainter until it is gone. You need follow none of them tonight. You need go nowhere and do nothing and be no one at all. You are simply here, in the warm dark, breathing, softening, sinking, safe. Let your face soften. Let your jaw loosen. Let the small weight of the day slip from your brow and your shoulders and your hands. Let the bed take all of it, all the weight, all the holding, all the staying upright and being correct. You may put it down now. You may put all of it down. And as you drift, let the great house glow once more, faint and far and golden, in the distance of your mind. Its windows warm, its rooms full of soft music, its long lawns silver in the moonlight, and then let it dim, gently, room by room, light by light, until it is only a glimmer, and then a memory, and then a soft, warm darkness, holding you, carrying you down into a deep and peaceful sleep where no one is watching and nothing is required, and you are entirely, perfectly at rest. Sleep now. Let the weekend and the world and all your cares drift away into the kind and quiet dark. Sweet dreams.